At the start of the film, we see a vast, barren landscape. A young man named Jerome Holm tells us that he hasn't seen the land when it was green, but his father has. Years ago, it was home to several farmers who grew wheat and grains there. However, since drought struck the land, no plant has been able to grow. The majority of the farmers had left, but Jerome's father, Ernest, hoped the land would return to its green state. He still believes that it only requires some water. However, in this world, people are killing each other for water. In the opening scene, two muggers attempt to break into a small house. Ernest captures them and kills the first one. The second mugger tries to persuade him to spare his life, but is killed when he secretly pulls out a gun. His son, Jerome, claims he could have helped him. The house the muggers were breaking into has an old water pump that breaks down when Ernest tries to use it. With no water left, the father and son ride a mule to the watermen, who extract water from deep wells under government contract. Ernest trades his supply with those people for water. For years, he has attempted to persuade them to provide him with water so that he can cultivate a small portion of his land. However, the watermen only work for the right amount of money, which Ernest cannot afford. On the way back, their mule falls and breaks its leg. Ernest reluctantly shoots and kills the animal. The two return home, where Jerome's sister Mary serves them bagged food. Because of the scarcity of water, Mary uses soil to clean the dishes. The next day, Jerome and Ernest go to Sam Lever's auction house to find a replacement for the dead mule. A robotic carrier machine called Simulate Shadow, Sim, catches their attention. Ernest wins the auction over a man named Flem Lever, who happens to be Sam's son. Flem is having an affair with Mary, unbeknownst to Ernest and Jerome. The two then visit Jerome's sick mother, Catherine Holm. She lives in a nearby hospital and can walk while connected to a special frame. They can't bring her home because the frame is too expensive. Jerome spends the day with his mother, while Ernest and Catherine kiss goodbye and part ways. On their way home, Ernest and Jerome stop at a gas station. Ernest takes a gulp of gasoline after pumping it into his car. The two come across a couple with a young baby begging for water. The father, Robbie, wants to sell the baby because they can't afford to care for him, but Ernest advises him against it and offers to help them with water. Robbie is aware of Flem and Mary's affair and hints Ernest about it. At home, Ernest confronts Mary about her frequent sneaking out, but she claims it is for her freedom and tells her father she despises him. She tries to flee, but Ernest locks her in her room and nails the windows shut. Ernest and Jerome wake up one morning to find Sim gone from the shed. Someone had stolen it. Ernest assumes it's Flem and goes to his house, only to learn from Sam that he left with a truck for the mountains that morning. Ernest then goes looking for him among the watermen, but they knock him out. When he awakens, it is already night. The watermen accuse him of taking their supplies. Ernest insists he did not steal them, but Caleb, their leader, attacks him. They fight for a while, but Ernest eventually grabs his rifle and flees. On his way back home, he discovers Flem sleeping on the road with Sim by his side. It is obvious that he stole the machine and the watermen's supplies. Ernest points his rifle at him, holds him hostage, and ties him to the machine. He wants to return Flem to the watermen and prove his innocence. On their way, Flem makes remarks about Mary that enrage Ernest. After a while of walking, they both become thirsty. Flem convinces Ernest to use the water from the watermen's supply. The two sit down to drink water and talk. Flem then tries to persuade Ernest to let him go so they can split the money, but Ernest is adamant about getting him caught. Ernest is weak and limping. He cannot walk another mile to the watermen. Flem knows this, so he hits Ernest with a stone, causing him to hit his head on a cliff. His head starts bleeding uncontrollably, and he is knocked unconscious. Ernest wakes up to find himself tied instead of Flem. Flem pours water into Ernest's mouth while he screams. Later, Flem arrives at Ernest's house on his motorcycle to take Mary. She happily rushes out to meet him. Ernest hasn't returned home, so Jerome goes out to find him. He discovers the machine on his own while traveling. When he reaches the watermen, they inform him that Ernest has died. Everyone assumes it was caused by a machine. The following scene depicts everyone mourning Ernest's death at his funeral. Later, Catherine and the children cry in her hospital bed. When they emerge, Flem picks them up in his truck. Following Ernest's death, Flem has become the family's mentor. He calms Jerome as he punishes Sim for killing his father. Later, he informs him that Mary is pregnant with his child and that he adores her. Jerome accepts their relationship. Later that day, Flem approaches the watermen and talks with them about sending water to Ernest's land. Caleb laughs at the idea, but becomes defensive when Flem blames him for Ernest's death. Flem also shows him a knife with Caleb's name that was discovered alongside Ernest's body. Caleb, scared of being accused, agrees to divert water to their field. Everyone is overjoyed when the land receives its first sprinkle of water. Flem works all day and night to grow wheat on the land. After a few months, they are fully grown. Flem marries Mary and currently resides at Ernest's home with Jerome and Mary. One day, his father, Sam, and some bank employees approach their home, threatening to seize the land due to Ernest's debt. Flem cannot afford to pay the debt, so he takes the machine and approaches his friend Robbie that night. He is aware of Robbie's intention to sell his child, so he persuades Robbie to accompany him in order to determine the value of a baby. When they arrive, Robbie discovers that Flem has made a secret deal with the people to sell his baby. The people attempt to take the baby away. Robbie resists and is shot dead by Flem. This causes a shootout between the dealers, and Flem flees with the money. However, the machine, Sim, has been shot and damaged. This activates the machine's auto mode, causing it to return to the manufacturer, Calvin Huyman. The next day, Flem pays the bank with the money he sold the child for. Jerome assumes that the money came from selling SIM cards, so no one suspects anything. The following scene shows Sim limping back to Calvin, who lives across the border. Calvin dials the number found on Sim and arrives at Holmes' house. He tells Jerome about the machine coming back to him, which surprises him because Flem told him he sold it to Robbie. Jerome asks Flem if Robbie sold Sim's parts and they somehow made it to the owner, but Flem is annoyed by the question and dismisses it. Then he tells them he's going to meet his mother that evening, but he's actually going to cross the border to meet Calvin, Sim's manufacturer. Later, he approaches the border, but the guard stops him because he is too young to cross. Anna calls him over and tells him she knows how he can get to the other side. In exchange for money, she places him in a vehicle with chickens and drives him over. They meet again on the other side, then separate. Jerome then proceeded to meet Calvin. Calvin shows him all of the machine's functions. He also demonstrates that the machine's eyes are cameras designed to capture the slope for reforestation. The camera has captured everything the machine has seen. Jerome plays the recordings and recalls his time with Ernest. As he reads through it, he is horrified to discover that Flem was the one who murdered Ernest. That day, after Ernest regained consciousness, Flem tied him to the machine and directed it to the watermen. The machine had dragged Ernest, who was injured but still alive, to his death. By the end of the video, tears stream down Jerome's cheeks. In the evening, he returns home without confronting Flem about anything. Flem and Jerome go deer hunting one day, and Jerome keeps the rifle and hides it under his bed for later use. At breakfast, Jerome tells Flem about Robbie's call. Flem is surprised and accuses Jerome of lying because he knows Robbie is already dead. Later, Flem receives a letter written by Jerome as Robbie. The letter requests that Flem meet Robbie at the same location where he killed Ernest. He is perplexed by this, but he decides to investigate whether Robbie is still alive. Later that night, Flem informs a pregnant Mary that he needs to go out and sell something. Mary wishes him luck and asks him to return soon. When Flem arrives, he calls for Robbie. While walking, he falls into a pit and breaks his legs. He's lying there, calling for help, when Jerome appears in front of him. When Flem sees him, he breathes a sigh of relief and asks for assistance. However, Jerome is standing there with a rock in his hand. Flem realizes he knows what happened and apologizes to him, claiming it was all an accident. He begs him to spare his life for Mary and their child, but Jerome refuses to listen. He points the rifle at Flem and shoots him dead. It has been 2 days since the event. Mary is concerned about her husband, but Jerome asks her to wait a little longer. He has decided to keep Mary in the dark about Ernest and Flem's deaths. Mary suggests they bring their mother home because they now have enough money to pay for the ringing system she lives in. The film ends with Jerome erasing Sim's video memory.
I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you in the next video.